Hey, what's up? John Sonmez from SimpleProgrammer.com. So, I am finally doing this video that I've had sitting here on my Trello board of videos to do for quite some time about the top 10 programming books. I already did a video on the top 10 books that I recommend of all time, which they're not necessarily programming related. And then I also did a video on 12 more books that I highly recommend, which you can check out here. But now I'm going to do a video on the top 10 programming books. Also, I do have a blog post on my blog called The Ultimate List of Programming Books, and it covers a lot more than these top 10. But I tried to distill it for this video down to 10. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about these books. And there's some books that should be on this list that aren't on the list because they're not as useful anymore. But these are sort of the top 10 books. These aren't the top 10 books that have been the best that I've ever read or influenced my life as a software developer, but they're the top 10 ones that are relevant today is what I'd say, so that they're useful for you. Because if I was going to put my top 10 list and it was just on what's influenced me, it would have been obviously effective C++ and more effective C++ and effective STL, books that I just read so many times and gained so much value from. But without further ado, here is my list here. So at the top of this list, and this is really no particular order, but at the top of this list is a book by Steve McConnell called Code Complete. In fact, Code Complete second edition is the current edition of that book. And this is an awesome book because this is one of those books that changed the way that I wrote code, because it made me see exactly how to structure my code. There's a lot of information out there as a software developer that's going to tell you about how to write good code and how to solve algorithms and how to write code in general. But this book just dissects down to such a minuscule, such a detailed level, how to actually name variables and considerations that you should take when naming variables, how to name methods, how to structure your code, not from the higher level design perspective of it, but from the low level, how to structure just writing a single method and all those considerations. These were things I never thought about before. It made my code so much better, so much more clear. I literally, by reading this book, I went from being what someone might consider an average coder to having code that people enjoyed to read because they felt like it was so expressive. And I learned a lot from that. Basically, one of the key things I learned was to make my code more expressive instead of writing comments. I've got a nice controversial blog post on why comments are bad that I wrote here that you can read about that. But a lot of that thinking came from this book, and it totally changed my viewpoint on this, and has been a huge influence in my software development life. So definitely recommend that book. It's a timeless classic. I believe it's in C++, I think the language, but it doesn't matter. It's got such great advice in there. Go through that book. I thought about doing a whole video series going through each chapter in that book because it would be worthwhile. Next, we've got Clean Code by Uncle Bob, Robert Martin. He wrote the foreword for my book, Soft Skills, A Software Developer's Life Manual. I consider him to be a huge mentor to me. And you'll also notice that my book isn't going to be on this list because, well, I am narcissistic, but not that narcissistic. So I'm not going to put my own book on the top 10 list, but you should definitely check it out because it's definitely a book that I think you'll find valuable. That's why I wrote it. So anyway, back to Code Complete. Or Clean Code. So Clean Code is, I think this is Uncle Bob's best book. I've had some chances to talk with him, did an interview with him on my How to Market Yourself as a Software Developer course. You can check out here. But he's a great guy, just an awesome guy. But he is so sharp, and he gets it, and he continues to get it as he has a super long career as a software developer, right? But he continues to stay up to date and relevant. So anything that he produces, you should be consuming. Basically, he's that good. But getting back to this book specifically, Clean Code. Why is this book so good? think of it as, and this is why I recommend this second, it's like Code Complete except one level higher up, right? It's still, and it has some of the same type of ideas on how to structure your code and make it clear, make your code easy to read and understand, and basically replacing comments with more expressive code. It approaches it from a slightly different angle, more of an architectural, more of a higher level. It goes down to the low level as well, but he's got some really good code examples in there. Like if you're wondering what good, clean code is, he shows you, and he shows you refactoring code to make it into clean code. Really good book. It's one of those books that, like, when I started reading it, I couldn't put it down because I was learning so much information. It was really helping me. And those two books, Clean Code and Code Complete, together totally changed the way I wrote code. Like you can see, this is before John read these books, this is afterwards, and it's a night and day difference. I recommend that every developer read these two books, Clean Code, Code Complete. But Clean Code was definitely a really good book, and it's really the way that Bob writes is really easy to read. That's the other nice thing, is it flows. You get his personality coming through, and he has a lot of useful, good information. I consume everything that he produces. Next, we've got the classic book, Design Patterns. So you can check out this book. There's also a Head First Design Patterns, which is a little bit easier to read. But Design Patterns I put on here because it's classical. Those design patterns that are mentioned in the book, you should be familiar with all of those design patterns. It's not a super exciting read. You should be able to identify all those design patterns, but you don't want to necessarily implement them all the time, right? It's actually, you should err on the side of caution when implementing design patterns. I guess we could do a whole video on our series on design patterns, but understanding and seeing those patterns in code, because they're common, is really critical. So that's why this book is so critical, is to understand what is an observer pattern, what is a singleton, what is a flyweight, and what is all of these different patterns that you see, right? A facade, an adapter, right? You got to be able to identify those things in code to see when they exist, and then able to refactor to a more formal kind of that design pattern, or to find out where those things are going to make sense in your code. Like having that level of knowledge that the patterns in this book, like memorizing these patterns, being able to identify these patterns, is going to bring your software development expertise up to a whole nother level, because you're going to be able to work with bigger building blocks. That's really the way to think about this, is this is the bigger building blocks. It takes some time to get these down. I've done a whole bunch of Pluralsight modules in the design patterns course on Pluralsight, which you can check out here. Just go and look at my courses and go to design patterns, and I sort of break this down and try to make this a little bit more simple, because it is fairly complex. I've wanted to do a series on the blog. I do have one blog post here. This is gonna be a lot of work for sorry, Rodrigo, you got a lot of work putting these links here, but I do have one blog post on simplifying a design pattern. You can see what that looks like here, but yeah, this is a really good book. Then we get into the structure and interpretation of computer programs, SCIP. This is a classic book. It was a book that was the main computer science book for MIT, I believe. I think they've retired it now, and I think they're using something else. But if you go through this book and do the exercises, this is sort of looking at programming from a totally different perspective than you normally learn it, but a very good in-depth one. Exercises are really hard. It's functional programming based. This is really something that people tackle this, and it's a great accomplishment to tackle and get through this book. I have mixed thoughts about that. I think sometimes it's a little overhyped, but it is really a really good book, and it's really challenging, and it will grow you as a programmer, and it'll probably grow you in ways that other books and other tasks aren't going to, because it's probably going to help you to view code and view programming and design from a different perspective, because you're approaching it from this functional perspective, and you're building things up from functionally how to build things. It's really hard to explain until you've read it, but go through and read this book, and it is challenging. You may not get through the book. It's tough. A lot of people do not, but you'll still probably gain some value from it. Then let's go into domain-driven design, Tackling Complexity in the Heart of Software. So hold on to your seats before you, hold on to your butt before you read this book. I had to read this book, I'll be honest with you, 3 times before I got it. This is, I don't want to say it's complex, but it sort of is complex. There's a lot here. It teaches you how to simplify things, but in a complex way. Like, there's complexity in doing that, because it solves a lot of problems that we have in design, in architecture. I think that it could probably be said in less words. I think that the book is pretty large, but it's got so many powerful, important concepts. So many of the things that you've wondered about, and you're like, God, this solution just doesn't feel clean. Well, when you do it this domain-driven design way, it does feel clean. I think it's really important. Very few people are still implementing domain-driven design because it's hard. It's hard. But even if you don't implement domain-driven design, being familiar with it, or at least partially implementing it, being familiar with these ideas that are in this book, really, really good. Highly recommend reading this book. It's another one of those ones. Again, a lot of the books on here that I'm putting on here I'm putting on here because they're going to grow you and stretch you as a programmer. If you want to really make it to the next level, that's what these are going to do. So that's why that book is on there. Then we've got number 6 here, which would be Patterns of Enterprise Application Architecture. This is not an exciting read. I'm just going to warn you. But again, it's like the design patterns book. It's like you're seeing all of these different patterns that exist in enterprise application architecture, which is basically, this is sort of the Bible for messaging, for subscription, receiver, publishing model, right? For the whole messaging type of infrastructure that you're going to see in a lot of applications, especially today, especially with IoT, especially with, not necessarily IoT, but microservices, service-oriented architecture, and messaging buses, right? Messaging patterns. This is really critical, really important stuff that is in this book. Again, it's a little bit dry, but it's going through all the different patterns. And once you understand this, again, a lot of these things I'm talking about, it's like once you see what's out there, then you don't have to be an expert in every single one of these patterns, but just knowing that they exist is going to give you options or solutions to problems. You're going to say, oh, okay, like what we're facing right now, I think I saw, and you're going to thumb through this book again, and you're going to be like, oh yeah, okay, we could implement it this way. This is like a pattern. This is what people have done before. And this is so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Again, a lot of these books are going to move you in the direction of becoming a good architect, right, eventually, which I think is software developer, that's a natural progression. Or a very high level software developer is also a very good architect because they understand how to solve things at the bigger level. So Patterns of Enterprise Application Architecture, highly recommend it. It's definitely going to broaden your tool belt. Then let's get to Cracking the Coding Interview. I have a love and hate relationship with this book. The reason why is because it's always like the #1 slot on Amazon, and I got, at one point, soft skills got to like #2, and it could just never edge out this book. But it's because this book is good. This book is good, right? It's critical because, especially if you're trying to get a job at like a Google or Microsoft, or I had to learn these lessons on my own, and it's right here in this book, like how to do the algorithms, how to solve problems, the computer science type of problems they have you do on a whiteboard where you're solving these algorithm problems. I had learned this doing problems on Top Coder, and with the book, which I didn't mention on this list, John Bentley's Programming Pearls, also a really good book. You can check that out here. I just didn't mention on this list because this book kind of takes the cake now as far as that. It basically, like, if you go through this book and you can implement all the problems in there and you understand all the concepts in there, you're going to ace technical programming interviews like nothing. Like, it's worth doing that if you want to get a book at, or if you want to get a job at one of those high profile Microsoft, Facebook, Apple, Google, because they're going to ask you, they're going to do these kind of crazy interviews where you're going to be doing all these programming problems on a whiteboard. And if you can do that, and it's got really good career advice in there as well. I think it's it's a good book. It's a thick book, but it covers like the basics of computer science, of algorithms, of all of that stuff. So Then let's go to code. We're getting to the fun parts here now. So code, the hidden language of computer and hardware and software. This is by Charles Petzold, who I had the pleasure of meeting at Xamarin Evolve. I've been a big fan of his, not necessarily his political views, but he's an awesome guy. Anyway, and he's done so many awesome things. But probably the most awesome thing that I think he's done is written this book, because this is such a good book. Gosh, this is like a book that it's fun to read as a programmer, and it teaches you a bunch of stuff that, especially as a self-taught programmer, you probably didn't know, like how this stuff really actually works. If you've ever dug into like how code works and how a chip works, how a CPU works, this book dives deep into it, which is so awesome. I did a Pluralsight course that never actually got published on how computers really work, and I went to this level, and this book does that, and it does a really good job of it. It's phenomenal, it's fascinating. You can give this to your non-coder friends and they will learn something. Any kind of intellectual person would really enjoy this book. It's a fun read. It's you'll learn a lot, I promise you, no matter who you are. Really good stuff, really well done, and I really enjoyed reading this book. Next, we've got GÖDEL, ESCHER, BACH, G-E-B. I think it's called, I forget what the subtitle is, like the eternal braid of something. This is a big book. It is so fun. It is just an awesome book. You'll just love this book as a programmer. I don't know if it'll expand your mind so much as a programmer. It probably will. It doesn't have very much really applicable. It goes into logic a lot, which would help you. But it's just one of those reads that I know programmers will enjoy, and you'll wish that you could read it again for the first time. That's the most common thing that people say when they read it, because it's such a different book, and it's such a refreshingly deep book as far as analytical depth and logic, and it really will kind of expand your mind. It's definitely a book that you'll enjoy. Trust me, you'll love this book. Then the last one is Agile Software Development Principles, Patterns and Practices. This is also by my good buddy and mentor, Robert Martin, Uncle Bob. And there's a C# version of this book as well. There's a Java and a C# version. And this book is like just one of those, again, I think clean code is slightly better, but this book is more of the higher level design. This book introduces TDD very well using this bowling game kata. It introduces the solid principles, right? Which you should know these things. It introduces just a ton of stuff on Agile. It's really good on Agile development, kind of the right way to do Agile development. What I believe, it's something that I think you'll get a lot of benefit from it. It's also, like most of Bob's books, a really fun book to read, really enjoyable read, and he takes you by the hand and steps you through and shows you refactorings and shows you how to do TDD and shows you really good examples of solid principles. So really recommend that book as well. So that's it. That's my list of top 10 programming books. I realize that there's some books that you may enjoy that aren't on there, and so, like I said, some of these books are the books that I think are most relevant now. I wanted to make a mix of books that I think would directly help you with writing code, that are enjoyable for all software developers, and ones that give you kind of a broader scope. So I feel like if you read these 10 books, you're going to get, I was trying to maximize the benefit that you would get from it. I think this is the point. If I left something out, let me know, put a comment below and say what book that I should have had on this list, and I'll check it out. And like I said, if the book that I didn't put on this list is obviously my own book, Soft Skills Software Developer's Life Manual. I'm actually writing a new book now. We'll get more to that later on in another video. I'll talk about that. But I definitely recommend you check out my book as well. But all these books, you can't go wrong with them. I think they're all top-notch books. And if you'd like to see more videos like this, let me know. And maybe I'll do a follow-up with some of the books that you guys have put in the comments below. I've read like probably hundreds of software development books, so I'm probably familiar with it. I've probably read it, so maybe I'll talk about some of those. And if you've got a video response for your own book, go ahead. Let's see it. So if you like this video, subscribe to the channel. I'll talk to you next time. Take care.